I once asked a marriage counselor, and this was a renowned marriage counselor. I said, can you tell me one thing? If you had to just say one thing that would help marriages and families, what would it be? And his answer surprised me. He said something like this. He said, we are not responsible for each other's feelings. We choose our feelings. Did you hear that? We are not responsible for each other's feelings. We choose our feelings. Let me tell you what I mean by this. Our thoughts cause our feelings. In other words, what we think causes what we feel. Stephen Covey told a story where he was on a train, and the train was kind of peaceful on a Sunday morning, and a gentleman came in with a bunch of his kids, and his kids started running around doing all these things that were kind of disruptive, kind of irritating people or throwing papers or something along those lines, where it was very clear that people were getting a little bit annoyed. And Stephen Covey at first was a little irritated that this man wasn't controlling his children. His children were going around, and so eventually he finally said to the man, could you control your children a little more, please? And the man said, something to this effect. He said, I'm sorry, their mom just died. And I kind of haven't been handling well. I don't know if they're handling well, something like that. And Stephen Covey's entire feeling toward this man, he was originally feeling irritated. But as soon as he knew the full story, the irritation vanished. And it was replaced with a feeling of compassion. And the feeling of, how can I help? You see, Stephen Covey didn't know the whole story, what was going on with this man. So he originally felt irritated, but then his thoughts changed and he felt compassion. Now, if you're feeling irritation towards any member of your family, your children or your spouse, or someone at work, anyone, is it possible that you don't understand the full story? And I would venture to say it's probable that you don't. Almost certain that you don't understand the full story. And so one of the things we can do is we can give each other grace, and we can say, maybe I don't understand the full story, and think positive thoughts towards people. As we change our thoughts, our feelings will change. Here's the next thing. This counselor said, and he said something else interesting after this. He said, most people don't get this principle. They don't get it until they're about 50. Most people don't get it till they're 50. And he said, a lot of people never get it. In other words, your child doesn't make you mad. Your spouse doesn't make you mad. You choose to be mad. Someone doesn't offend you. You choose to take offense. Now, a lot of people don't want to believe this. They would rather play the victim and rather say, oh no, my problems are because of him, and if he would just stop, or my problems because of her, and if she would just stop. And they want to place the blame. And the reason they want to do this is because it's easy, because then they don't have to take responsibility. But it's also very imprisoning, because it's not the truth. It's not real. And so when you're constantly blaming someone else for your decisions or your feelings, your thoughts, your circumstances, you may feel like, well, it's not my fault. But then you can't change it because you've given your power to them. You see, as soon as you say, it's my fault, I chose these feelings, which is true. Every feeling you've in your whole life, you've chosen. As soon as you can say that, you can then at that point take the responsibility and say, because I chose it, I can choose otherwise. Now, let me tell you something that's important in our society that I think a lot of times people get wrong. There's this thought in psychology that we're like, they almost think we're like balloons. They're like, if you don't vent your feelings, you'll explode. Now, I think that's a lie. I don't think we're like a balloon that will explode if we don't vent our feelings. Now, I'm not saying that it's not really nice to have someone really listen to us and understand us. Of course, that's nice. And we just talked about listening, how, to build influence people, listen to them. But what if it is a lie? What if it is a lie that we're not balloons? Maybe we're more like trail builders. What if we're more like trail builders who can build trails? And let me tell you what I mean. In our brain, they have millions of little neurons. And when we learn something new, we actually build a neural pathway in our brain through these little neurons that goes in a certain path. And it's kind of hard to build that neural pathway at first. In fact, it's kind of like you're hacking through some growth in a forest or on a trail. But as you continue to go down that path, you then become very good at going down the path. And so it goes from being a trail in the woods to almost being like a big trail in the woods, and then to maybe a sidewalk, and then to maybe a dirt road, and then maybe a paved road, and then eventually you can make it into a freeway. What happens is as we go and do the same thing and we go to the same emotion again and again, it becomes easier to do that. Is it possible that you're not a balloon, that maybe you're a trail builder? Is it possible that your need to vent your feelings is actually a lie? You don't really need to. Maybe you can just change your thought and choose to be compassionate or understanding or happy rather than angry and feeling victimized. You see, our thoughts create our feelings, and our feelings usually lead to actions. It all starts with our thoughts. So how do we get control of our thoughts? There's a principle that's called mindfulness that's saying basically if you can get to a point where you can actually watch your thoughts. Now that's the difference between being in a river where you're being pummeled by the water. You're actually in the water and it's pummeling you. These thoughts are coming at you. The water's coming at you. And stepping out of the river where you're actually on the banks, you're dry, the river's going by, and you can actually see the thoughts go by in your head. It's a practice called mindfulness. Can you actually practice, be really still? A lot of people try to do this when they're meditating, where they're saying, I'm just going to pay attention to my thought. A thought comes by and they acknowledge that thought and they can decide to choose it. They can try to change it. But they're not being pummeled by the thought. They're standing on the outside looking at the thought, watching it go by. If we can be really careful of the thoughts that we allow on our stage, like Stephen Covey was, he said, I'm not going to allow. And what happened is he was irritated because of the thought he had about the man. Why was he not controlling his kids? But when he found out new information, he was no longer felt irritated. His thoughts had changed and so had his feelings. His whole paradigm, as he called it, had shifted. And so what can we do to watch our thoughts? Now, it's not to say this doesn't take work. It takes work, a lot of work, to develop a new neural pathway, to make something new. I'm not going to lie to you. Changing your thoughts is hard work, but it's super important and it's super, super work that pays off a lot. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to start noticing your language, because language a lot of times reveals how we think. No longer will you say, she makes me mad, or my child is making me mad, or anything that implies that it's their fault for your feeling. From now on, I want you to start saying, I'm choosing to be mad. I'm choosing to feel calm. I'm choosing, and use language that is showing that you're responsible for your feelings. Now, if you can get this down and then teach your kids to do the same thing, you'll be light years ahead of most dads and give your kids light years more jump in the world. Because, like I said, this counselor who was very experienced and very renowned said, most people don't get it till they're 50. What if you could teach this to your kids when they're 5 and 6 and 8, when they're young, so they don't have to go through 5 decades of life thinking somebody else is making me feel this, and instead have the empowering thought that they can change. I think Stephen Covey also mentioned there was this lady who, in one of her books, she felt so victimized. She's like, I've had to deal. I think she was a nurse or something. She had to deal with this crotchety old man who was constantly negative. And she realized after attending one of his seminars or something that it was her that was choosing to feel resentful and bitterness against this guy. And she goes, it was such an eye-opener. Once I realized he can't control my feelings. I can control my feelings. I can be around somebody I love who's saying mean things to me or saying negative things, or somebody else, and I can still choose to feel however I want. And I do that by controlling my thoughts. Now, it's like a muscle, that ability to control thoughts. It doesn't get built up in a day. We have to exercise it. We have to use it. You don't see a bodybuilder just go in and all of a sudden he's a bodybuilder. The person goes to the gym. They work it out. So when you first start doing this, it may be hard for you. It may be hard for you to say, gosh, my thoughts are going all over. Keep working at it. It's the law of the harvest. Keep working at it. When you do, you'll find that you can change your feelings. Now, there's a good book on this. There's a book called Feeling Good. It's a yellow book. You can check it out. There's a lot of resources about looking through different thought patterns and distortions, cognitive distortions, they call them. And so I want you to start doing the work to being responsible, because you are, as a dad, 100% responsible for your own thoughts. You are 100% responsible for your feelings. Your child does not make you mad. Your wife does not make you mad. Your spouse does not. You are choosing those feelings by your thoughts, and you're 100% responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. Start doing that. Now, it may be bad news, because you may have to acknowledge that you've been lying to yourself, that your feelings were caused by someone else. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it right now. Start acknowledging that your feelings come from your thoughts, and you can control the stage of your mind. And if you do that, it then becomes empowering, because now you get to choose. You get to be responsible for that. And your ability to lead your family, ability to lead your children go way up. Better yet, teach your children this principle when they're young. Talk about it. Say, hey, how can we change our thoughts so that we can realize what's really going on? Now, I'm not trying to tell you to change your thoughts to lie. Like, you don't go, Tony Robbins talks about, you don't go to the garden and say, there's no weeds, there's no weeds. If there's weeds, you acknowledge the weeds. But you have the thought about, I can handle these. I can work at it, and I can get rid of them. So we're not trying to come up with thoughts that aren't true. In fact, what we're really trying to do is come up with thoughts that are more true, which the truth is, people don't control your mind. You do. People can say whatever they want, and you can still choose otherwise. Develop that muscle, work on it now and from going forward. Anytime you catch yourself saying anything, blaming, I can't, or she made me, or having these thoughts, I want you to go in and have zero thoughts where someone else is responsible for the way you feel, because it's not your thoughts. You are responsible for your own feelings. Thanks for listening. We can lead our feelings with our thoughts and actions. I want you to remember that. Our feelings don't control us. We actually lead them with what we do and what we think. So I want you to use the worksheet attached to show and to figure out how you are going to change your feelings by changing your thoughts and your actions. Do the work, lead your feelings. You're responsible for your feelings. If you have ill feelings, you can change them with thoughts and actions. Do the work, use the worksheet. Good luck. You've got this.